In this episode, we're going to speak with Mariana Henninger, and we're going to talk about the psychological side of marketing, specifically how you can build more trust with your audience so that you stand out from your competition and so you can make sales faster and more often. So stay tuned.
If you want to build a legitimate, profitable online business without shiny objects, without the hypey gimmicks, and without the stress and overwhelm, if you want to make more money without having to be present online all day, every day, pumping out content that nobody sees and hustling DMs to generate leads and sales, then this is the place for you. Welcome to the Digital Trailblazer Podcast, your online business university, where you'll learn how ordinary people start from ground zero with no influence, no email list or audience to sell to, and no business or marketing experience, and go from working 9-to-5 jobs to building successful 6- and 7-figure online businesses and all the steps in between. Learn the strategies that worked and what didn't. Learn the mistakes that they made and how to avoid them, and then learn their plans for scaling their businesses and taking things to the next level. All so that you can build your business faster and easier and make more money without sacrificing the things that are important to you in your life. I'm your host, Leah Ray Getz, and with me is my husband, Todd. Now, let's get to it with today's guest.
Welcome, everybody, to the Digital Trailblazer Podcast. And Mariana, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you here. Why don't you just really quick let our audience know who you are and what you're all about?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. So I'm Mariana. Like you said, I am a 15-plus year documentary filmmaker with an Emmy, 2 nominations. So I really was kind of born into storytelling, if you will, first through photography and then through video, and have always loved telling stories that really connect with us emotionally, that make people see life in a different way through somebody's eyes. And all throughout my career of, being at the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, of, around the world in boot factories in Afghanistan and fishing for sea cucumbers in Haiti and open prisons in Finland, I was always still kind of secretly in love with marketing. And so finally it came to a point in my entrepreneurial journey that I was like, if not now, when? I had been at NBC for about 5 years and decided that now was when. And so I created a company called Brand Magnetic, where I brought this idea of, hey, is there a way for us to really connect emotionally with each other? Essentially, like businesses connect with their customers before they even talk about their offer. We think about nurturing in such a linear way and such a very long sales cycle-y way, where it takes like 6 to 12 months of posting consistently and emails consistently and all of this volume of content in order to close someone, in order to make a sale. And I think that's much too long. And I don't think that we need that. In fact, it's a disservice to our customers to make them go through that in order to reach a solution that is ideal for them. And so I'm so excited to talk about it. And obviously we'll dive in more.
I think with what you're doing, it's so important for marketers to understand the psychology of what we do, because, and especially for people who are really analytical. And I think, as far as business owners go, a lot of us tend to be analytical, and we miss that whole emotional side of things. But one of the things that, for me and my wife, Leah, one of the things we learned very early on in our business was that people only buy from those that they know, like, and trust. Okay. It doesn't matter how great your product is. If they don't feel like they know, like, and trust you, then there is no sale. And along with that is that people make decisions based on their emotions, and they back up that decision later on with facts and logic and whatever reasoning they need to. But the decision to buy is an emotional decision. And once you understand that, that opens up so many more doors for you, and it makes business so much easier. So starting out here, what are some things that we need to know? Like, if we want to make that emotional connection with our audience, what are some of the first steps you would have people take?
Yeah, absolutely. When I walk folks through my program, that's the very first thing we do is, I'm actually curious if you can guess it because it's not something you've never heard of. All good marketing is based on knowing your customer deeply, right? And so that's the first step. You have to know people so deeply. We're not talking about just typical info data on your avatar, if you will. You need to know Todd and exactly what Todd is feeling in the deepest level. When we talk about 6 or 7 layers of why, a lot of folks talk about that when you ask a question and then you ask, well, why is that? Well, why is that? Well, why is that? Where you get really to the core of people's fears, their aspirations, their desires. Like, what is it that they truly in their gut really want? What is it that they're crying about at night, whether physical tears or whether deep inside is keeping them up? Those are the things that we want to know. We want to know our customers inside and out. So that's not new. Like, ideally, everyone in marketing is talking about that first step. And the process that I like to go through, if I may like kind of go into the next steps, is that all right? What do we do after that, right? What do we do with that information in order to build that personal, emotional connection instantly? The way that we go through it in my framework is that the very next thing is you have to know yourself at that deep level as well. First of all, everyone should know themselves. But for the purposes of this end goal, which is in my case, a brand video, 2 to 4 minute video that builds that personal emotional connection immediately, that makes people feel like, oh my gosh, I like Todd. And this is like right after meeting you, right? And that I'll talk about this magical moment of when people are discovering you. So they're willingly top of funnel wanting to know who you are. And we just don't capitalize on that at all. So we could definitely, I want to go back and talk about that once I'm done with the steps. But anyway, so aside from knowing yourself deeply, you want to know yourself through the eyes of your customer. And what that means is, what do people love about me? Why do they come to me? Why did they buy from me? Which is a very important question that I have all of my clients and my students ask their audience. When somebody has just bought from you, capitalize on that moment to have a conversation with them. Obviously, make it a friendly conversation, not just market research, but ask them that question. Why did you buy from me? Ask them, what stood out about me? What was that moment that clicked and you said, okay, I'm ready? That is gold. That information right there, my friend, is the thing that will propel your sale. If you are able to harness that, that like shiny diamond and use that energy in different ways of telling your story, and I'll show you my framework to do it, it's absolutely gold. Because essentially what you can do is reverse engineer from that and understand which part of my story, which part of my personality, which part of my mission and my drive can I use to drive that feeling, accelerate that trust in one go, right? I talk about doing this using your story, using our story, if you will. It's not your origin story. It's not the story that you tell your friend. I think we're so kind of confused about which story to tell about ourselves. If I were to ask you how you started your business, Todd, I'm sure it's an interesting story. And there's probably not too much of a framework that you would, in normal conversation with a peer or with a friend, just tell a great story and you're fine. When you're thinking about your story for building that personal emotional connection with the customer, so in the purpose of accelerating trust for sales and sales is serving, right? Sales is not an icky, sticky, disgusting word. It's awesome because it's solutions for our people that we care about. So we want to accelerate sales with our story. It means understanding how to curate that story so that people, when they hear these parts of the story, they are like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm emotionally connected. Obviously I don't say that, right? But that's the result where they feel like I've gotten to know Todd. Now, every time Todd shows up in my feed, in my socials, in my inbox, we've already known each other. It's like we had this coffee chat, this intimate conversation where I feel like I know you. I'm so much closer to trusting you now. I haven't even heard your offer, by the way, right? And the other thing that I love to reinforce is that we're often taught that we should show up as experts, right? Whether folks are being taught to do tips and tricks, hacks, or they're being taught to like, hey, show up as the authority. You should be the authority. Like, that's all great. But to your point that you made earlier, we don't just buy from people who know their stuff, right? We want to enjoy the journey it takes to get to that solution. So unless it's like your toilet needs to be fixed at 3 a.m. and you're going to call whatever plumber you can get there as quickly as possible, we want to actually like the people that we work with, that we spend our money on, that we invest time with. And so why do we microdose our audience with these little bits of our personality throughout 6 to 12 months of content, when instead we could curate a story about our story, but in a way that makes them feel closer to us, in a way to generate those feelings of trust so much faster.
Yeah, I love that concept. And so much of what you just talked about here is just so relevant to the discussion. I know, going back to your point about ask people or being able to see yourself through your customer's eyes is so important. I know that question that you said, ask them, why did they buy from you? That's a question we ask on every single sales call before we even make the offer. Why us? Why not somebody else? Right? Exactly. And that, like you said, that information has been absolute marketing gold. It has been so valuable to us in other parts of our marketing, just being able to make our other content so much more impactful. It's not like we're grasping at straws, throwing stuff out there like spaghetti on a wall, trying to figure out what works. We know what's going to work because we hear that from the people that have actually bought and joined our program. And then also about being able to condense your story down to, like you said, 2 to 4 minutes, whether it's a VSL, whether it's a webinar, whether it's a workshop that you're doing, any type of presentation where you've got an offer at the end. If you're following a script or a template or something that somebody else gives you, there's always a part in there where you have to tell your story. And I think so many times, like this is probably the part that most people get wrong more than anything else, is they tell a story that it starts in the wrong place. It goes into, and then it's irrelevant. They go into details that don't matter, that nobody cares about. And if you look at the analytics, like if you watch your video analytics or your, how many people are on the webinar, it drops like that. Right.
Well, the thing is, like, you haven't made your story about them, right? And I think some people get that confused though, Todd, right? Where they're like, nobody cares about your story. That's not true. People care about great stories all the time. We watch movies. What is that? Somebody else's story, right? We read books. It's somebody else's story. People care about great stories. They care about us, each other as humans, in the context of we want to use our story in the right way, right? People have committed to a masterclass, a webinar, call it what you will. They probably know by now it's 2020. We're late in the game in that people know that they're going to be sold something. You have to understand how to take your story and make them feel something, make them feel that you're the right person for them. You're not just an awesome guy. You're not just an expert. You're not just a really intelligent lady. You are the right person who has the right amount of expertise, who has the life experience, who has the emotional journey and the drive in your own life that they want to connect with.
Yeah. And the other thing, it just came to my mind because you mentioned, being able to stand out from your competition and asking that question of, why did you buy from me? I mean, for me and Leah, we're coaches. Like if I have to boil it down, we're coaches. They're a dime a dozen. There's so many other people doing what we do. It's a saturated, but every market is like that. If you're a fitness coach, if you're a health, wellness, whatever it is, they're a dime a dozen. Knowing what it is that your customers see in you that separates you from everybody else. And if you figure that out and you can take that and highlight it in your marketing elsewhere, you have now created a blue ocean for yourself to market in. When you do that, right?
There's no competition. Listen, it's not just about understanding how special you are. I think most of us who are successful know that. It's about understanding how to convey that. And to me, I really preach about doing this top of funnel. So I mentioned earlier, can I go into talking about like this magical moment? I think top of funnel is such a special place. And we don't spend a whole lot of time there because we're all about like getting people to the bottom of the funnel, right? We're all about like, let's move them on from this top of funnel. But if you think about top of funnel, when people first connect with you, right? So you're in the online space. It's like maybe you saw somebody's comment on a Facebook post. Maybe somebody did recommend you or sent your name along. Whatever the case may be, typically the first thing you ask yourself is like, wait, who is this person, right? Who are they? What's their deal? Let me check them out. And what that means is you go on their profiles. Typically, you go either on LinkedIn or Instagram, depending on where you spend time or where you think they'll be, your YouTube channel, whatever the case is. And, some people are intentional about curating their pinned materials on social or again, like maybe their website, that's where they're going to. And by the way, there's a reason why the About Me page is the second most visited page on any website. People are asking that question, like, who are you? Who is this team? Who are they? And the problem is, to the point that you made earlier, we just don't pay enough attention to the information that we're putting to answer that question. We maybe have About Me post or About Me page, but it's typically kind of an annoying thing to write. Like it's the thing we don't want to focus on. We kind of like want to get it done, tick that box and move on and probably not look at it again for years. And my argument is like, you are missing out if you're not paying attention to how you answer that question. And so obviously in my business with my students and clients, that's we focus our entire attention on creating one asset that lives everywhere so that every single person who's coming to connect with you to answer that question watches that one brand video. And that brand video, like we've talked about, is extremely curated. It's extremely intentional. It uses emotional visuals. It's not just B-roll. It's all of these things to get people to feel that connection with you. And that is an incredible determinator of how they're going to see you from here on out. Will they forget you? Will they sign up for your lead magnet and then you start showing up in their inbox and they're like, wait, who the heck is this person? I do that all the time. I cannot tell you, Todd, how many times I've got a new name in my inbox. I was like, wait, who is this again? And I open their email and I don't get an answer to that question. And unless their email's really, really good, chances are I'm unsubscribing because I've been like, nope, too much clutter. And so, yeah, so it's your chance to decide whether you're going to be clutter, you're going to be forgotten, or you're going to give yourself the hard road of building that trust over 12 months or 6 to 12 months, whatever your sales cycle is, or you're going to capitalize on that magical moment and say, hey, let's feel like we had a coffee conversation, a really intimate buddy to buddy, bestie to bestie talk where you get to know who I am in that one moment. I'm not going to talk about myself the whole time. This is the one moment where we can like connect. And so every time you see my face, every time you see my name, it's like, oh, it's Todd, it's Mariana. Like, I like them. Right. Pay attention to this.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about a brand video. Can you explain a little bit for us exactly what that is and what goes into a brand video?
Yeah, of course. So a brand video is a 2 to 4 minute video. And it tells your story in the way that we've just been talking about it, right? It's a curated way of telling your story very intentionally so that you know exactly which feelings you want to generate and create inside of your audience when they watch that. It's geared towards cold audiences, so top of funnel. It's not geared towards the people who've known you forever, although lots of times my clients were like, oh man, they've been listening to my podcast for over a year and they watch this video and they're like, wow, now I feel like I really know you. So it obviously benefits everyone in your ecosystem, but the idea is that you're bringing that curated version of your story. Nothing's fake, nothing's made up. It's just about how you prioritize which parts to tell and how to tell it. And we combine that with what I call emotional visuals. You know, facetious about the word. I don't like calling it B-roll because we're not just looking to cover it with video. We're looking for ways to use video to complement the story, to drive a certain feeling. We talk a lot about like metaphorical ways to illustrate your story. What kinds of things in nature, what are your hobbies that really speak to your values, things that we can illustrate where we're not just seeing the words in video form. I'll give you an example of that. So one of my students, her name is Julia, she's the podcast teacher. And she, at the time when we worked together, didn't have a podcast. And so we couldn't use the story for podcast. And, you know, we're kind of brainstorming. So what would visuals be for her to talk about the things that she knew her audience loved about her and why they were coming into her program and that spoke to their pain points, right? So in her case, it was they had tech overwhelm to start a podcast. They didn't know where to go. There was like the typical thing of like, you want to know how to do something. You don't want to spend 50 hours on YouTube sifting through 1,000 videos to figure it out. And at the same time, you want the benefit of doing it with somebody that you like. And in this case, they loved the fact that she not only had been a teacher, but she's obsessed with like systems and order and everything is step by step and very like well explained and all of that. So one of the visuals that we used in her story, in her brand video, I asked her, I was like, Julia, what are your hobbies? Let's flesh this out a little bit. And one of the things she mentioned was, oh, I love jigsaw puzzles, thinking like not relevant, right? Completely, that has nothing to do with podcasting or her story or any of it. She doesn't have a story about puzzles that would be relevant. And so I was like, oh, perfect. So jigsaw puzzle, you know, you've got a ton of different pieces. They're everywhere. They're a mess. And as you work through a system, you put them together and you create something beautiful. There's also the things that kind of come to mind right away are that you pour the pieces out and there's a nice, beautiful, natural sound. We call it nat sound of the puzzle, like, you know, like the pieces sort of falling on the table and there's not much sound after that. So it's not the perfect visual, but this idea of like the metaphor of putting a puzzle together and talking about her love of systems and her love of order. And when she was a little girl, she used to put the the markers in rainbow order and things like that. So just looking for really colorful, unique, specific things about you that you love that can illustrate that personality, those values, your mission, your drive, why you do what you do, what makes you unique, what makes you awesome, in all these different creative ways.
Yeah, and I love the way that you are incorporating the visuals with that. Like so much of communication is nonverbal. And because you could do a brand video and it could be a PowerPoint, it could be a talking head video. There's a bunch of different ways where you could do it and communicate the same information. But the thing is that for the emotions, for all this other stuff, like the visuals play such a big part in that. Because you're right, it's, communication nonverbal, but also the imagery, like the jigsaw puzzle, that's going to bring up memories for people. That's going to bring up all these other things that they connect with other points of their life. Being a little girl and organizing your markers in order of color and all that. Thinking back to my childhood, when you said that, I have this very specific memory of taking a picture out of a newspaper and coloring it for my grandma. And she put that up in that, and it was in her house until the day that she died. Right. And those emotions, you don't realize like the power that can have on somebody when you incorporate that into a video like that.
That's a great point, Todd, because it actually kind of goes both ways. You can use emotionals to have people like essentially like pull their own really awesome feelings tied to a memory. It can also go the other way, both visually and probably, I would say the slippery slope there is depending on how you tell your story. And I'll give you an example. I was actually chatting with another business owner, and I was actually on her podcast. And afterwards, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool," because I could tell. So she started her business for freedom. She's a coach as well, and like most of us, that's what we're looking for. But the moment she started her story was tied to, I think, her mother who sadly died of cancer. And so she was like, "Oh yeah, so my story starts when my mom died of cancer." And I realized, blah, blah. And I was like, "Oh, okay. So this is a moment where we really kind of want to curate your story." Here's the thing that I always tell my students, because sometimes they're like, "This is such an important part of my story." I was like, that's okay. You can have so many important parts of your story. In this moment, when we're creating your brand video, you have to think about your customer first. It's not your autobiography documentary, right? It's not the one end all be all that's going to tell the story for the rest of your life. It's not like you won't have any other opportunity to tell the other parts of your story that we are not including here. So for example, the idea of even mentioning something like cancer, obviously we think when you mention that it's dramatic, it's vulnerable, it's intense, but it can also make people think their brain goes in a different direction. The moment she said that, I had just read a stat about how many people have cancer nowadays. And I was like, wow, that's where my brain went. And I left your story. I left being emotionally connected to you. What I'm trying to say is like sometimes there are small details that we feel are just an obvious part of our story. But in this moment, when we're really being intentional about curating that story, that your brand video, that's the sort of filter that we use. We're not trying to be fake. We're not presenting ourselves as perfect. For example, we're finishing a brand video right now for a client in San Diego, fitness coach, fitness instructor. And his story is about his vulnerability with alcohol. So it actually goes really deep in a different direction. So there's lots of opportunities to be vulnerable, but it's a case by case in some, when we're talking that specific. But to your point, we can use it to, it's so great when we're able to find the ways to bring all sorts of emotion, like positive emotions, good emotions, great memories that are now associated with you when people watch your story.
What you said there, the emotions and associating that with you, that's the important part there. So once you get this brand video created, what are the different ways that you can use it? Where are you putting this?
This is the second most asked question, right? Which, fair enough. Like people haven't heard of this. It's like, how do I use this thing? Where does it live? It lives in so many different places, Todd. I have a list of 50 different places where your brand video can be used, can live. I'll give you kind of the top 5. The first place is most of us are doing business online or we're interacting socially, right? And so pin to the top of your social media profile in all of them. And so wherever there's like a featured post or a pin or however you can put it so it stays up there and everyone who connects with you watches it, boom. Obviously, your About Me page. If you are the face of your brand, some of my clients, some of my students have both on their homepage, not necessarily top of fold. That's okay. Draw them in with what they need for them. And then as they're wanting to answer the question of who you are, answer it with your brand video, but for sure on the About Me page. It should live on your email signature. Every single person who gets an email from you is going to be enticed to watch, whether, however you want to describe it, whether it's watch my story or here's why I do this, is I think the one that I use. Click on that. They watch your brand video. All of a sudden, they're ideally on your website or on your Instagram, wherever you're sending them to, where they can connect with you further, or you have a call to action button right there and there. You can kind of think intelligently about how to use that. We went over 3 different places, or so many. The fourth one that I'll shout out is your welcome sequence. So there's always an email where we tell our story. So this one, I actually had a client come up with this idea, which was brilliant. It worked so well for her. She said not only her response rate, but her click-through rate skyrocketed when she did this. She took her brand video and she created different GIFs from it. And so instead of just having a text story, maybe a photo of her story in that one email in her welcome sequence, she told her story, but she interspersed it with these GIFs. And the call to action was watch my story, right? Or here you can see my video. And not only did people actually open it and click through to watch it, they responded, Todd. Cold audience responding to a welcome sequence email, like that's gold, right? They were responding, compelled to share their own story, which had been her call to action the whole time. Like, she didn't have the video. Before she had the video, she was just asking them, hey, reply and tell me your story. Crickets. As soon as she put the brand video in there with those GIFs, people were clicking through, watching it, coming back to the email, responding it, and sharing their story. They had just met her. Maybe they had listened to a podcast episode. Who knows how they met her, but it's phenomenal to think that that was the ROI from just that one use of it. I've had stories of ROI that go way beyond that, where somebody listened to them on a podcast, saw their brand video, DM'd them, bought high ticket, like boom, 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 boom. And there's so many uses, right? So those are kind of the really interesting, fun, obvious uses, if you will. You can use a portion of it or maybe the entire thing, depending how short it is, in your webinar. All of a sudden, like, people are actually watching versus falling off. You can use it to pitch yourself. I've had clients who were either contacted by or found out that, like, the New York Times needed certain types of people to talk to. They sent in their pitch. They included their brand video. Boom, they were booked. If you're sending it cold, also, it works really well. I was a journalist for 15 years. I got pitched a lot. And I tell you, if I had seen a brand video, even if it wasn't high end or beautiful, I would have remembered that person. It would have stuck with me. And chances are I would have gotten on the phone with them to see, I would have already gotten a sense of who they were, right? That's the whole point. And so they're already like 20 steps ahead of everyone else who's competing for that voice or for that story.
I love the ideas, especially for us, like digital marketers. We've sold a lot of online courses and things like that. And I know that the first thing that I thought of when you mentioned places that we could put this was whenever somebody registers for like a live event, whether it's a live webinar or a challenge or something else like we're doing, and we're running paid ads to a cold audience to get registrants. Like, to me, that right after they register, the very next email that they're going to get is introducing them to us, because it's people that have never seen us before. They don't know who we are. That would be the first thing I'd want them to see before they jump on a live training with us. So, but yeah, the email signature, yeah, I would absolutely use it there. I love that idea about creating the GIFs or GIFs, however you want to pronounce it, the moving pictures, creating those and putting those in an email. That's really creative. I love that. And then having the button, there's so many ways you can use it. I love this idea of the brand video and all the different ways that you can use it. And I can see how it would be so incredibly effective in creating that emotional connection with people. And do not underestimate, for anybody listening to this, do not underestimate the power of creating that emotional connection with your audience, because that will get you so much further ahead than any marketing gimmick or whatever else that you can implement. It's a stupid, simple rule, but people only buy from those that they know, like, and trust. And if you can do that within 2 to 4 minutes, you need to do that. Mariana, this has been such a great conversation. And I know that we're running into a time crunch here, but I know that you have a giveaway, a freebie for our audience. Can you explain to them what that is?
Yeah. So hopefully you weren't exhausted typing notes from this episode. I got you covered. I have a cheat sheet that really walks through my process of how to think about what parts of your story to tell and how to tell it. It's called the Ultimate Cheat Sheet, and you can find it at brandmagnetic.com/cheat sheet. And please connect with me on Instagram at Brand Magnetic. My DMs are open. I love hearing from folks who have heard me somewhere, and just a lot of people just like their wheels turn after this conversation. And if you have an insight you want to run by me, or if like, oh, is this part of my story, or is whatever question you have, feel free to shoot me a DM, and we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. And we will have the links for all that stuff in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. Mariana, thank you again so much for being on the podcast. We really enjoyed having you here today.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Digital Trailblazer podcast. For show notes and information about today's guest, head to digitaltrailblazer.com. Now, if you love this episode, if you got some value, make sure you leave us a review and subscribe. And be sure to share this episode with anyone you know who could use help to build their business. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.